the Law of One Breakdown channel. Have you ever wondered what the raw material actually says about Jesus, free will, sexuality, and even hair? Each week we go straight to the original sessions and explore one topic through the pure wisdom of the Law of One. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this subject. Let's begin. Hello, thank you for listening, and in this episode, I'm going to tackle the densities. The first and second densities, to be exact. For me, it wasn't the easiest bunch of information to remember. I would find it very interesting, but I could never remember all the nuances of the densities. And then you have to think of time, space, space-time, and what that means to the densities, the consciousness level of the densities. So it was a lot to grapple with when I first started reading the Law of One. And so I'm kind of glad that I decided to do these series, because in making these little episodes, it helps me retain the memory of the sessions, whereas oftentimes I would forget. So in this session, like I just said, I'm going to be talking about the first and second densities pertaining to Earth. When we get up to the higher densities, I won't be able to pertain it to Earth because we haven't gone there yet. But it'll all start making sense as I go on. So I made this little graphic, and interestingly enough, the 7 major densities, and then there's an 8th, but we'll talk about that. It's a little bit different than the 7. They also correspond to the colors of our chakras, our energy centers. So I thought that was really interesting. So I'll just go through this real quick, and then we'll get on to the actual sessions and see what Ra has to say about the densities. First density, oftentimes Ra will call it the red ray. So the density of awareness or consciousness. The types of existence in first density on Earth was water, fire, air, and earth. And the length of that density is about 2 billion years. Okay, and then the second density is called the orange ray. It's the density of growth. And the types of existence are plants, trees, and animals. And the length is 4.6 billion years. What's interesting, and the way I wrote it like this, is that within each density, there's 7 subdensities, or levels, if you want to call it. And within those levels, there's other levels. And basically, at the very beginning level of second density, it would be things like the plants, the trees, the single-celled organisms, and whatnot. And as they progress and evolve, these souls incarnate into, let's say, the pack animals and herd animals. And then our pets. When I say 7 subdensities or sub-octaves, or 7 levels, if you will, it's not so cut and dry like I've represented it here. You know, it would be a blending from one to the next. And Ra also stated that when a soul graduates into the next density, it doesn't mean they have to start off at the very beginning of that density as far as conscious awareness and what that level would look like. It would depend on, and I'm not talking about the first and second density, but third, fourth, and so on. It would depend on their level of awareness. It'll all start making sense when I start talking about the other densities as well. So we'll just start off with the first session. Okay, in session 16.51, Ra says, so I'm starting with the first density, and I'm going to start with this session and what Ra has to say about the term density, and I'm going to end it in the 8th with this, and it'll make so much more sense if you actually listen to all of these episodes about the densities. So Ra says the term density is what you would call mathematical one. The closest analogy is that of music, whereby after 7 notes on your Western type of scale, if you will, the 8th note begins a new octave. Within your great octave of existence, which we share with you, there are 7 octaves or densities. Within each density, there are 7 subdensities. Within each subdensity, 7 sub-subdensities, and so on infinitely. So that reiterates what I was just saying with the slide before this one. Also, a density is, for Earth, let's say, it's a region of space we're spiraling closer and closer to the galactic core. And when we get through a certain kind of space in a certain area, it does something to the Earth and it makes it vibrate at a higher frequency, basically. And that would be the next density. And so that's how densities work as far as Earth and in space and other planets as well. Okay, in session 9.5, Dawn asks, the first entities on this planet, what was their origin? How were they before they were on this planet? And Ross says the first entities upon this planet were water, fire, air, and earth. In session 13.16, Dawn asks, could you tell me about the first density of planetary entities? And Ross says, each step recapitulates intelligent infinity in its discovery of awareness. In a planetary environment, all begins in what you would call chaos, energy undirected and random in its infinity. Slowly, in your terms of understanding, there forms a focus of self-awareness. Thus, the logos moves. Light comes to form the darkness, according to the co-creator's patterns and vibratory rhythms, so constructing a certain type of experience. This begins with the first density, which is the density of consciousness. The mineral and the water life upon the planet, learning from the fire and the wind. The awareness of being, this is first density. In session 78.29, Dawn asks, could you tell me how, in first density, wind and fire teach earth and water? And Ross says, you may see the air and fire of that which is chaos as literally illuminating and forming the formless. For earth and water were, in the timeless state, unformed. As the active principles of fire and air blow and burn incandescently about that which nurtures that which is to come. The water learns to become sea, lake, and river, offering the opportunity for viable life. The earth learns to be shaped, thus offering the opportunity for viable life. That's interesting. I didn't quite get it when I was making these slides, but wind and fire were first, and earth and water were still in that eighth density, timeless, who knows what it's like, and then they bloomed from the wind and fire. Very cool. In session 76.13, Dawn asks, could you give me an idea of the length of the first and second densities that occurred for this planet? And Ross states, there is no method of estimation of the time-space before timelessness gave way in your first density to the beginnings of your time. Okay, and I'll explain that in a minute. The measurement would be vast, and yet this vastness is meaningless upon the entry into the constructed space-time for your first density. Upon the entry into the constructed space-time, your first density spanned a bridge of space-time and time-space of perhaps 2 billion of your years. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but eighth density, if you will, forms back around and starts first density. And there's not a whole lot in the law of one material. Ra has not experienced that as a social memory complex themselves. They're in sixth, going to graduate into seventh density right now. Ra said that they have about 1.5 million years to go as far as time, as we understand time goes, until they graduate into seventh density. And so there's not a whole lot about the eighth. And so that beginning where they're talking about time space before timelessness gives way and whatnot, it forms into a time. They call it the great mystery, and beings that graduate past seventh enter this eighth sort of existence. And in my understanding, they would be, entering the galactic core, or however that works, whatever the galactic core truly is. And they can't give a time estimate because, one, they haven't done it, and two, it maybe isn't something that you can know until you experience it. But it doubles back around and starts, a new whole galaxy. This is how, in my head, I represent it, and it kind of makes sense because we are spiraling through space. We're not just going around the sun. We're doing that, but we're also spiraling closer and closer to the galactic core. And that's what these densities are. As you progress further closer, you get bumped up in a density. Okay, moving on. Okay, this is going to be still session 76.13. And Raw states second density is more easily estimated and represents your longest density in terms of the span of spacetime. We may estimate that time as approximately 4.6 billion years. These approximations are exceedingly rough due to the somewhat uneven development, which is characteristic of creations which are built upon the foundation stone of free will. Free will kind of throws a monkey wrench in because free will is just like it sounds. People have the choice to do whatever they want. And the reason second density is more easily estimated is because of that time that goes from eighth back into first that they can't estimate. But they can estimate once life starts, let's say, on a planet, and then once it moves it through space into the second density for 4.6 billion years. Okay, now we're going to switch gears and go right into second density. And again, second density is the orange ray, often referred to by the raw folks. It's the density of growth, and the types of existence are plants, trees, and animals, single-celled organisms that eventually, again, you got to think of it, their consciousness is within these things. And every time they die and go to the metaphysical space, the soul space, however you want to word that, then over time, they start reincarnating into pack animals. And they learn, believe it or not, certain things that they couldn't learn as a plant or a tree. And then eventually over time, because the length is 4.6 billion years, so it goes on for a long, long, long time. But then they are now herd animals, and that has a lot of interaction with humans. So one thing to keep in mind is that when Earth was in second density, it was a long, long time ago, there weren't our pets. There weren't people yet. And so this is a little bit misleading in that I'm showing Earth in second density, but I'm also showing the consciousness levels of how these second density beings that are alive now on planet Earth evolve. Okay, we'll start second density with session 9.14. Dawn asks, then there were the second density entities here prior to approximately 75,000 years ago. What type of entities were these? So that's what I was sort of just saying, is that third density lasts 75,000 years. But before that, Earth was in a region of space that was able to support the life of the single-celled organism and the plants and the animals. So Dawn's basically asking, what was the life like when Earth was in second density space and Earth supported that kind of life? Because we're in third density space. Well, Earth is considered still third density, but we're actually in fourth density space. But that's for later. Okay, so Ra says, the second density is the density of the higher plant life and animal life, which exists without the upward drive towards the infinite. These second density beings are of an octave of consciousness, just as you find various orientations of consciousness among the conscious entities of your vibration. So different levels, different levels of awareness and whatnot. Okay, in session 9.15, Dawn asks, did any of these second density entities have shapes like ours? 2 arms, 2 legs, head,
and walk upright on 2 feet? And Ross said the 2 higher of the sub-vibrational levels of second density beings had the configuration of the biped as you mentioned. However, the erectile movement which you experience was not totally affected in these beings who were tending towards the leaning forward, barely leaving the quadrupedal position. So it sounds like monkeys to me. In session 9.16, Dawn asks, where did these beings come from? Were they a product of evolution as it's understood by our scientists? Were they evolved from the original material of Earth that you spoke of? And Ross said, this is correct. In session 9.17, Dawn asks, do these beings then evolve from second density to third density? And Ross says, this is correct, although no guarantee can be made of the number of cycles it will take an entity to learn the lessons of consciousness of self, which are the prerequisite for transition to third density. And they've got a long, long time, so it's probably many, many cycles of life, death, rebirth. In session 14.1, Dawn asks, you said the second density strives towards the third density, which is the density of self-consciousness or self-awareness. The striving takes place through higher second density forms, invested by third density beings. Could you explain what you meant by this? And Ross says, much as you would put on a vestment, so do your third density beings invest or clothe some second density beings with self-awareness. This is often done through the opportunity of what you call pets. It has also been done by various other means of investiture. These include many so-called religious practice complexes, which personify and send love to various natural second density beings in their group form. In session 14.2, Dawn asks, when this Earth was second density, how did the second density beings on this Earth become so invested? And Ross states, there was not this type of investment as spoken, but the simple third density investment, which is the line of spiraling light, calling distortion upward from density to density. The process takes longer when there is no investment made by incarnate third density beings, meaning there are still second density beings on Earth, animals and plants and whatnot. And by showering our pets with love, it actually helps them graduate into third density because they get this level of consciousness that they wouldn't get just in a pack animal situation. And so what Ross is saying basically is without third density beings, i.e. human beings, it takes a lot longer. Okay, in session 19.2, Dawn asks, let's take the point at which an individualized entity of second density is ready for transition to third. Is this second density being what we would call animal? And Ross says, there are 3 types of second density entities which become, shall we say, inspirited. The first is the animal. This is the most predominant. The second is the vegetable, most especially that which you call sound vibration complex tree. These entities are capable of giving and receiving enough love to become individualized. Little side story. This was years ago, and I was going through a tough time, and in the mood, I couldn't snap out of this funky mood. And I went into the forest, and I just started looking at all the stuff, the trees and the shrubs and everything. And I would say, I love you. And after just a few minutes, I swear on a stack of Bibles, I felt the love coming back at me. And I came up out of that forest completely back to me. That mood that I couldn't shake was absolutely gone. And so now I just do that just for fun. You just say, I love you. And mean it, I do. And I do love trees. I love foliage. I love all plants, you name it. And you just say, I love you. And you don't expect anything back. You just say, I love you. And you will, I promise you will start feeling love coming back at you. Little side story there. The third category is mineral. Occasionally, a certain location, places you may call it, becomes energized to individuality through the love it receives and gives in relationship to a third density entity, which is in relationship to it. This is the least common transition. Okay, that's all I have for first and second density. And these are just intros, okay? There's so much more in the law of one about each one of these densities. And so this is just a kind of a taste, that's why I call it intro to densities, because that's all it is. To give anybody who doesn't have the understanding of densities and wants to know, because the law of one can be difficult to understand at times if you don't have the base of certain things. Like you need to learn some of the lingo, mind, body, spirit complex. What's the social memory complex? And then the densities, just so that it's easier to ingest and understand all the wonderful things that the Raw folks had to teach. All right. I hope you enjoy this. Take care, everyone.